Everybody hear me all right? All right, Miss Cindy, if you would be so good. I have a lot of info I'm going to be going over today kind of quickly, and we're going to pass out a cheat sheet for you. And there'll be a short exercise if you guys want to participate. So if you need a pen, Cindy comes around, let her know, and she'll hook you up. So, without further ado. Okay, so presentation is called Paranormal Thinking, Impediments to Logical Reasoning, and the Borley Rectory Investigations. It's arguably one of the most haunted places in the world, certainly one of the most thoroughly documented and investigated. We've talked for a bit about, in past lessons, about the history, about folk, about the science, and now we're going to talk a little bit about the psychology behind investigating, and some traps you have to be careful to fall into. I have a quote from Plato here. He says, "When one believes that an argument is true without reference to the art of logic, and then a little later decides rightly or wrongly that it's false, and the same thing happens again and again, they end by believing that they're wiser than anyone else because they alone have discovered there's nothing stable or dependable, either in facts or arguments." And that's obviously what we sort of try and predicate our investigations on. So to begin, we'll start by introducing a few terms. Logical fallacies. These are things, you might remember these from high school. It's an incorrect argument in logic and rhetoric, which undermines an argument's validity, or more generally, an argument's logical soundness. And these things were first propounded by Aristotle. He was a great logician, of course. And then there's what's called cognitive bias, biases in our thinkings. These were first propounded in the early 70s by a pair of Israeli-American psychologists named Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. There they are, enjoying some beverages. And so their paper, their seminal work, Representativeness Revisited, Attribute Substitution and Intuitive Judgment from 1972, first put forward this idea. These are impediments to logical, rational decision-making that are relevant to all areas of our lives. Not just, I talk about this stuff in investigating the paranormal, and also as an educator. And it's just incredible to think all the different ways that our thinking as human beings is flawed, and that we've identified a lot of these flaws. Now we can actually correct them if we bother. One of my favorites is called the Dunning-Kruger effect. I'm not sure what that was. So this is something, this guy Dunning and his associate Kruger propounded this idea that your aptitude or competence at something tends to be overestimated if you're incompetent, and often underestimated if you actually are competent. They predicated this on this story. This guy, I have his name here somewhere, MacArthur Wheeler. So this is how these things can affect you in the real world. MacArthur Wheeler decided one day he was going to rob a bank, and he did some planning. He was going to rob 2 banks, actually, and he knocked them both over in the same day. He walked in there, stick them up, put the money in the bag, and he got home and he was feeling pretty good about himself until the police picked him up that very night. And they brought him down to the station and they said, we got you dead to rights. And he's like, I don't understand, how did you catch me? I did everything right. And they go, well, we've got you on the CCTV cameras. You're the security footage right here. And he goes, no, that can't be right. And they said, well, I'll show you. So they showed him the videos. And he goes, but I used the juice. And the police are like, what do you mean you used the juice? He says, well, I'd read online that if you smear your face in lemon juice, it makes you invisible to security cameras.
Are you kidding?
They make invisible ink with lemon juice, and so he'd read this somewhere online. He even tried to prove this to himself by taking a selfie, and the exposure came out wrong, and he just thought he was invisible. So this is sort of he was obviously clearly not a competent bank robber, but this Dunning-Kruger effect prevented his successful bank robbery, right? So you see how these things that we have to watch out for, all of us, every day in our lives, but particularly when investigating the paranormal. One of the fallacies we in the paranormal field are most often accused of is the argument from ignorance. That's that an untestable hypothesis must be true. If you were here a few months ago, you heard us when we talked about Popper's falsifiability theory. For something to be true, there has to be some conceivable way you could prove it false. So we have to watch out for that. So we'll talk about the Borley Rectory. It's located at CO10 78E Sudbury off of Hull Road in the United Kingdom. We mentioned Borley Rectory haunting in our second talk in December in passing, and an investigation conducted there by Harry Price. He's one of the most famous paranormal investigators in history, and also by the Society for Psychical Research, the very first, the godfathers of paranormal science. A Cambridge commission visited more than 25 times. The British military abandoned plans to billet soldiers there because of heightened poltergeist activity. It actually scared the British military out of this location. That's pretty incredible. It's just like a laundry list of paranormal phenomena. We've got apports, phantom knocking, writing, footsteps, poltergeist phenomena, apparitions, everything. So it's all there. The history of Borley goes back much further, though. If you guys remember your high school history, you'll recall that the Norman, William the Conqueror, conquered England from France in 1066, and he ordered the composing of the Domesday Book. It was just a survey of everything in this new land, and that's when we first find reference to Borley. It was a manor there, and a church was built on the site 34 years later. Beginning at the time of King Henry VIII, the Waldegrave family moved in. They kept the grounds all the way up until Reverend Henry D.E. Bull took up residency in the middle of the 19th century with his family. Activity increased quite a bit under the Bull residency there. Visitors to the property claimed to have sighted apparitions, including a headless coachman and a nun. We see a nun there a lot. The Hulls resided there for several generations before it changed hands, a couple times more. Have to watch out for begging the question. This is another logical fallacy, whereby say something like, paranormal activity must be real because what I experience can only be described as paranormal. It's sort of a circular argument. The sky is blue because it's not red and yellow, right? Anyway, this guy Smith moved in the 20th century. He left only after a year, and that was around the time that that's Reverend Henry Bull there, and Harry Price stepped in at this time. So he began having experiences from a very young age. He was interested in stage magic, archaeology, drama. He worked professionally in each of these fields, and he brought to bear all the skills he'd acquired in those fields while working in the paranormal. He even wrote a play called The Skeptic about a poltergeist experience he'd had as a child. And he set about exposing a number of fraudulent psychic mediums across Great Britain and Europe, and joined the Society for Psychical Research in 1920. He eventually split with them and founded his own University of London Council for Psychical Research and the National Laboratory of Psychical Research, which he led until his death in 1948. So in 1929, Reverend Guy Smith had contacted the editor of the Daily Mirror, Vernon Wall, who wrote a piece about Borley in his paper before contacting Harry Price. Price held a vigil with Vernon Wall in his summer house at the grounds. And in this very first exercise, Price witnessed things being thrown around. There were a number of disconnected servant bells that began ringing. Just all sorts of stuff happened. Price interviews Miss Ethel and Frida Bull, the descendants of Reverend Henry D.E. Bull from the 19th century around this time. So we have no physical phenomena at this time. Of course, there's no concrete proof of these happenings, unfortunately. In fact, the editor of the periodical, the Daily Mirror, Guy Smith, would actually eventually accuse Harry Price of staging some of the phenomena. So we discussed the scientific method in our first talk in November. The importance to science of reproducibility, right? We have to be able to reproduce these things. That's Karl Popper's falsifiability. So next day, they hold a seance. Questions are answered via tapping on the walls. They summon spirits who tap a mirror in the home's blue room. And Price continues to investigate the rectory for the rest of that year, often with Daily Mail correspondent Charles Sutton. So the Smiths move out. Reverend Smith preaches his last sermon there in April of 1930, and then Reverend Lionel Foister and his family move in. And this is when things really start to heat up. He lives there with his wife and his daughter, and all three Foisters almost immediately begin to claim experiencing phenomena, almost footsteps, smells, things moving around, and even the apparition of Harry Bull. So here's a quote from YourGhostStories.com. It says, without any explanation, they found themselves locked out of rooms, windows would suddenly smash, personal items would vanish under their noses. It wasn't uncommon for them to hear unnerving noises from all over the house. And as time went on, these mischievous antics turned aggressive. Marion was actually accosted one evening. Marion Foister, the wife, she was thrown off her bed in the middle of the night and even slapped by an invisible hand. She couldn't do anything about it, obviously. So presumably the Foisters were well aware of the property's history. If you enter a purportedly haunted site, with that knowledge in mind, it's likely you'll fall prey to some kind of confirmation bias. Confirmation bias, as the name suggests, is that when we go looking for an outcome, we tend to find it. Taking in data that supports our ideas and often discarding facts that don't. Dilbert illustrates confirmation bias for us here. And so we have a short exercise on the back side of your papers. you should have something that looks kind of like this. I'm going to walk around, and this is not obligatory participation, this isn't classwork, but you're going to try and determine the sequence. There's an order to the numbers, and you have to figure out which numbers fit and what that rule is. So like 246, they give you a freebie, 246, and that adheres to the rule, that fits the sequence. So if you write down 3 numbers, it can be any 3 numbers, 3, 4, 5, 100, 90, 50, whatever, any particular order. And you're going to try and figure out the rule. So take a minute, fill out the, let's see, the second row there, just pencil in 3 numbers. And I'm going to take a minute and see if anybody can figure out the rule.
Wait a minute, so based on what you put, we're supposed to...
Yeah, it can be any sequence. It can be, you know, even numbers, multiples of 5, whatever it is. You're just going to try and put down numbers that you think will fit the rule and deduce from there whether or not you can figure out the rule.
Based off of 246, right?
Based on, well, that one you know fits, yeah. So you just want to come up with some other sequence of numbers, any sequence of numbers, right? And see if you can figure out what the pattern is. Add 2 or add 5 or whatever. Does that kind of make sense?
No.
No.
If I'm coming up with it, then I know what the rule is. I know why.
Well, no, you're not coming up with the rule. It would be like if I gave you blue, purple, green, you'd have to try and figure out what these words have in common. They'd all be colors. If you wrote apple, banana, yellow, it would not fit the rule, right? So you're trying to figure out what the pattern is.
Same rule as those numbers?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
Each line will fit the same rule. So you haven't figured out this rule yet. You only know that 2, 4, 6 adhere to that rule.
So we're writing down the next one based on the fact that trying to make it fit the same rule as...
Yeah, they can be any numbers as long as they conform to the same
Oh, I
rule.
see.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if that's right. I didn't know if you're supposed to.
Yeah.
And there's no wrong way to do it. I mean, the worst thing that happens is it doesn't conform to the rule, but that will still
But I
provide
know this is a trick.
data.
So we don't trick you.
You can it's not exactly a trick. It's just a cognitive bias to which we all sort of fall prey.
All right.
You're sticking with this?
Who has something down? That works.
We're only your social security number.
That's fine. That works. That works. So you got a bunch of patterns that fit the rule. You just have to deduce what the rule is from that. What do we got here? Let's see here. That works. Yeah. That'll do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
That fits.
Does it?
That fits. Yeah. Actually, it does. Yeah.
Yeah, it fits, yeah.
What do we got here? That works. That conforms to the rule.
Okay, all right.
Yep. That works. Who else? Yeah, as many or as few as you like. That fits. As many as you think you need to figure out the rule. That works. Sure. All right. So I won't dwell too long. You guys can swap stories or what have you. But who thinks they've figured out my rule? Who thinks they know what the pattern is to these numbers? Anybody have any thoughts?
Is it just adding 2?
Not quite. Not quite. Anybody else?
Any even number?
Not quite. Any other thoughts? So I'll tell you.
Oh, I know, I have.
What you got?
How about the first 2 letters equals the last letter?
Whoa, that's complicated.
No.
Not quite. No, in fact, the only rule, and you guys are going to get mad, but the only rule is that the numbers have to increase. Now, why was that so hard to figure out, though? It's because confirmation bias, when you set out to find the pattern, you see 2, 4, 6, and that biases you, and you think, it's probably even numbers. You add 2. And you go to look for confirmation of that theory, rather than try to break that theory, rather than looking for evidence against it, rather than going 3, 5, 12, or 15, 1,000, -5 or something, right? We all look for confirmation of our first impression, rather than looking to break that theory. And so if you go into a haunted house thinking, this is probably haunted, you're going to be looking only for proof that it is haunted, and not proof that it's not. And sometimes you might be neglecting some very important evidence that way. So that is why these sorts of cognitive biases affect our thinking in tangible ways every day. So back to the story. Reverend Foister keeps a diary of occurrences, pretty thorough, careful notes, which he sends to Harry Price, inviting him back over the protest of the SPR, the Society for Psychical Research. They don't want him back there. An eventful evening involving objects being moved and Marion Price being locked in a room ends with Price and his party alleging that Marion Foister herself is causing a number of these phenomena. So they leave on bad terms. Mysterious writings continue to appear on the wall. Let's see here. What happened to my... Here's what you do.
I haven't touched anything yet.
Okay, there it is. So yeah, this sort of stuff, Marianne, please get help, starts to show up on the walls, right? A little spooky. So anyway, domestic drama, the failing health of Reverend Algernon Foister. The Foisters move out. They're replaced by Alfred Henning and his family in 1937. Henning rents the Rectory to Harry Price for a lease of 6 months, and Price invites 40 volunteer investigators to come along, and he puts together this instruction for his observers, and they all start gathering data, and some of them experience some pretty intense phenomena. Some experience nothing at all over the course of 6 months. So, you know, perhaps some of them fell prey to confirmation bias. During a planchette seance conducted off-site by one of Price's assistants, Helen Glanville, the alleged spirit of a French nun named Marie Lair was contacted, and she alleged that she'd been murdered in the 17th century by a member of the then proprietors, the Waldegrave family. Remember, they lived on the grounds for a couple hundred years. Another spirit allegedly manifested itself at that same seance and said that the owner, Captain W.H. Gregson, that the house would burn down that very night and reveal the remains of a human body. It was actually 11 months later when a new owner, Captain W.H. Gregson, was moving in. He was unpacking his library, he knocked over an oil lamp and started a fire. The insurance company, it's worth noting, alleged that this was a case of arson and insurance fraud. But nonetheless, a significant portion of the Rectory was destroyed. Let's see, where is that?
Micah.
So this is what it looked like after the fire. A lot of damage. And they were excavating a well, and they actually found human remains down there. Yeah, so pretty real stuff, kind of funny. They found a woman's bones. Price had them interred at a cemetery not far. So they are excavating, and this is actually the mandible of a human female that they found after the seance. Eventually he wrote 2 books, one called The End of Borley Rectory and another called The Most Haunted House in England. And so the SPR took issues with his credulity. There were some allegations of, you know, foul play, and the SPR was notoriously rigorous in collecting data. So they commissioned their own investigation separately. It was led by Eric Dingwall, K.M. Goldney, and Trevor Hall. This is Trevor Hall here. Hall was actually a close associate of Price's, and they wrote a book, The Haunting of Borley Rectory, a critical survey of the evidence, and they further alleged that Price had faked some of the phenomena, and that also, there were a lot of mundane other sources, creaking of the building, rodents, pranksters, transients, so forth. So in these instances, we have to be careful not to fall prey to a false dilemma. This sort of like, either Price was manipulating this phenomena, or the house is not haunted. In fact, both can be true. He could have been manipulating some phenomena in a haunted site. In fact, the 2 circumstances are not mutually exclusive. One doesn't preclude the other. And you also may find yourself making an ad hominem argument that Harry Price is a poor investigator, therefore his findings are not valid. And that is a fallacy as well. Let's see here. Let's see if I can bring this a little larger. So this is a sort of illustration, choosing lesser of 2 evils, right? It's a false either-or fallacy. Anyway, the claims of Dingwall, Goldney, and Hall were so hotly disputed by a number in the paranormal field, including Nander Fodor, we mentioned him, he's a huge name in the paranormal, and also Peter Underwood, a close associate and the world's leading expert on Borley, claimed that the writers of the critical response to Price's investigation were also biased. So the SPR commissioned another report, ad hominem attack, right? So Peter Underwood, he'd been to the site a number of times. He was an associate of Price's. He's been many, many times. He continued to gather evidence. We have to be careful too about, so at some point there was myth and rumor for a long time about these underground tunnels. In fact, there is a tunnel that runs roughly a mile between several structures. It's a little drainage tunnel. It is large enough for a person to slip back and forth between. It's partially destroyed. They had to excavate it. And Peter Underwood eventually put together the Borley Rectory Companion. And these tunnels, interestingly, this is why we have to be so circumspect. The tunnels are absent from most internet sources, right? You have to go digging to like the deep stuff. Wikipedia doesn't mention these tunnels. They're pretty significant, I think, in terms of the investigation. So according to the end of Borley Rectory, the Harry Price book, the tunnels on the property had been reported for many years, and they found a caved-in tunnel. Reverend G.E. Smith had one of them filled in. Beginning in 1970, Jeffrey Croom Hollingworth and Roy Potter, another pair of investigators, witnessed apparitions of the nun again, began conducting experiments with sound scanners, take audio recordings. They get a lot of EVP at this time. This is the first instance of EVP at the site. And the tunnels are further mapped. They measure these tunnels about a foot high on average and about 3 feet wide, so you couldn't comfortably scoot around in there. The Cambridge investigations and the SPR investigations continue. There are other investigations to this day. It's still a very hot site. Of course, it did emerge later that Mary Foister, Reverend Foister's wife, was having an affair with a lodger, and she admitted to faking a number of the paranormal activity as a cover for her illicit goings-on. Yeah, so, you know, it's a loaded question, right? Who knows? And then, of course, there's the argument from authority fallacy, which is when you take an argument as likely to be true based on the credentials of the person making it. I certainly don't have sufficient credentials to convince you guys. And even if I did, that doesn't mean you should take my word for it, right? More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette, right? There's your argument from authority. So hopefully this will illustrate some sort of faults in our thinking that we encounter all the time, particularly in the paranormal. But remember, don't take my word for it. That would be an argument from authority fallacy. Thanks.